In the next 20 minutes, I'd like to provide you with another perspective on how Blackburn has been portrayed through photography, filmmaking and photojournalism, and how this has impacted upon my research here at Blackburn College. I began my doctoral programme in 2015 at the Northern Centre of Photography, the University of Sunderland, a department that specialises in photography practice and visual culture. My research centres on an investigation into how Blackburn has been visually presented by print and televisual news. I'd like to start by showing you a selection of images that have been used to represent Blackburn. And my first point is that for a very long time now, photographic images have been the main device that advertisers and the media use to enforce or reinforce a political, commercial and cultural message. It's also worth stating that photography's abilities as a powerful and commanding conveyor of these messages has long since been debated and agreed. Writers such as Roland Barthes, John Berger and Susan Sontag have all dissected, analysed and explained the medium's defining characteristics and its constant ability to define and describe the world as we know it and as we knew it. These first images are taken from a variety of sources including Channel 4, the BBC and the Daily Mail, and we could mostly agree that each of these agencies has a varying political nuance. What is striking, however, is how they focus on a limited and very specific range of visual tropes through which they seek to evidence their narratives. Narratives that range from racism, social isolation, poverty, segregation, and religious or political extremism or fanaticism. So as we see here, Blackburn is visualised through broken fences, shops and houses for sale, terraced houses or mosques, sometimes both, pints of lager and hooded tops. Like many here today, the decade into which I was born could be argued as one of industrial anarchy and violence. By 1979 and following the Winter of Discontent, December of 1978 to March of 1979, it was commonly accepted that the promised cure for the British disease, the decline in industrial productivity, the increasing number of strikes, and the poor relationship between government, management and unions had failed. This national context filtered through to me by way of images from the mainstream media and through the attitudes of those around me who all seemed to have an opinion about the turmoil the country faced. As the son of a charge hand and a part-time munitions shift worker, and one who attended an inner-city comprehensive school, I was not educated via exposure to fine art or critical literature. Images of conflict, home and abroad, were absorbed through grainy television pictures and tabloid press photographs which, by their nature, tended towards the sensational. As expressed by Sontag, being a spectator of calamities is a quintessential modern experience. Wars are now also living room sights and sounds. If it bleeds, it leads, runs the venerable guideline of tabloids and 24-hour headline news shows. And in some significant respects, the media and its audience have not evolved. It's not a surprise to me that I pursued a career in the visual arts, given that I was so acutely affected by the image world. And now, from my career as a photographer and photojournalist, I accept that writers, producers, editors and commissioning agents set a theme for investigation, and then all parts of the media-making process subsequently fall in line with the theme during production of an article, report or film. These images here are no different in that respect, as arguably the decision to portray Blackburn in this way was decided in pre-production, based on what the agency had decided would most likely strike a chord with its target audience. Whilst the troubles in Northern Ireland clearly do not compare to those of present-day Blackburn, it does provide us with a similar perspective on how the media sensationalises. It was commonplace in 1970s Northern Ireland for photographers to be airlifted in via helicopter and then flown out once the riot or disturbance was over. McCullen's photograph of a tear gas attack in the Little Diamond area of Derry describes the intensity and violence of what the Sunday Times in 1971 called the war on the home front. In contrast, Paul Seawright's photographs from the late 1990s show us another side to the conflict, the locally produced defensive architecture from North Belfast, illustrating how conflict affects the everyday lives away from the eye of the media, essentially what division and conflict looks like to those who live there. And it's here that we can learn much from a visual archive such as the one left to us by Howard and his father. The breadth of subject matter, the time over which the images were made, and the empathy and professionalism in the production of the Talbot photographs lend them an objectivity as a collection. Yes, through their lens, Blackburn can be a place of poverty or crime, and given that lots of the images were commissioned by those seeking to promote a product or item of news, there are certain demographic groups that are represented to a greater or lesser extent. Yet, arguably, another perspective is Blackburn as a place of harmony, quality of life, sense of community, ambition. And this makes the Talbot collection very important because today, unfortunately, at least from a national media perspective, Blackburn appears currently to be stuck with an image problem. The current difficulty for directors and photographers seems to be that they are struggling to develop a new, accurate visual language for the diverse post-industrial, some would say post-working class, communities such as those who live in Blackburn. They wrestle with the notion of the North as a locale of regeneration and optimism. Rather, they seem stuck in the language of the past, the industrial toil, the unemployment, or the ghettos of the 1960s. This is not to diminish the real problems that deindustrialised towns like Blackburn face. They are as vulnerable to social issues as other towns across England and in the UK. But that Blackburn has been a focus for these issues in the mainstream media more recently is particularly concerning for those of us who are contributing positively to its transformation or at least improvement. In fact, during the recent Panorama broadcast in January this year, even Ted Cantle, author of the Cantle Report in 2001, expressed his sympathy that Blackburn was feeling the full force of the media's attention on matters such as community cohesion. So with this in mind, I began several months ago making photographs of Blackburn that related to one of the most democratic descriptions of the town available to us today. The World Wide Web has fundamentally altered the way in which we can acquire and engage with information and with communities and groups around the globe. The information superhighway means, as my wife put it recently, there is simply no longer any need to ponder. One of the most accessible and immediate online applications is Wikipedia, and the page dedicated to Blackburn was published in 2003 and has been edited and refined thousands of times by thousands of users, thus providing us with a written narrative about our town from multiple viewpoints, histories and perspectives. There are, of course, some great non-fiction and ethnographic books written about Blackburn, including the 1969 book City Close-Up by Jeremy Seabrook, which inspired my studies throughout my undergraduate degree at the documentary school in Newport, South Wales. But no book about Blackburn can claim such an array of authors and contributors such as those who have created and refined the town's Wikipedia article. I am, of course, familiar with the academic conventions on avoiding websites such as Wikipedia in order to develop influence, obtain academic integrity, and create sound argument due to concerns over its reliability and accuracy. However, what we cannot deny is that this paradigm of a post-punk world of connectivity and freedom of information has led to those previously unable of accessing data, writing history, or contributing to national and international debates now being able to do so in the space of one generation with a simple click of a button. Just like this button. I felt it would be interesting as part of my research, an experiment if you like, to isolate all of the places named in the Wikipedia article for Blackburn into a short list an itinerary of significant places, identified by those contributors. In some ways, this would mirror the approach one might take if venturing to another country on holiday, a sort of tourist version of a pre-production process, but this time led by a view formed by multiple online voices instead of, say, Paul Theroux or Laurie Lee. One of the first places that Wikipedia directed me to was All Hallows Spring. It's a bit dark in here, but could I ask for a show of hands for how many people know where this is? You're not allowed, if you were here yesterday, you're not allowed to put your hand up. So it's maybe 3, 4. Better than yesterday. We've got stronger researchers in this group, clearly, today. We've got some ethnographers, Richard, in today, I think, clearly. Or some topographers, probably. That's a better description, isn't it? Well, this is arguably the most important place in Blackburn. This is a place of pilgrimage, worship, and well-being since at least the Iron Age. For those of you who don't know, this site is located underneath the old Telegraph building, behind the Adelphi Hotel to the east of Blackburn Cathedral. It's at basement level, in an area that businesses use to store their bins and to park their company vans. When this spring was unearthed and excavated in the 17th century, an inscribed stone was found, dedicated to the building of a Roman temple in York by the 6th Legion of Vitrix. This was the same legion who was sent to Britain in AD 119 by the Emperor Hadrian to secure the region and fight in battles further north. What I learned from this image and from my research into it is that there are places that should be visible to us all. They are part of our heritage. And I question what this place, this site, would look like if this was in Florence or Bologna, not Blackburn. At the very least, it's reassuring that Blackburn's past of one of migrant transition, shifting demographic, even the exotic, is not just rooted in the 1970s or indeed 2018. In the light of the recent Panorama programme, perspective here is, I believe, very important. The link to the foreign, perhaps even to the exotic, can be found in this image of Corporation Park, a photograph I made in August 2017 of Blackburn's Victorian Glass Conservatory. Following a couple of hours wandering around the park making photographs, I subsequently selected only one image that presents a narrow topographical view of a park which is over 44 acres in size. But it now seems significant that I chose a photograph that visualizes the contrasting themes of municipality, empire, and decay. After all, this was how I interpreted the park at that time, a practical place that had seen better days, one that harked back to a more exuberant and poetic time, now often a place for local dog walkers or those who use it as a shortcut to get to work. In contrast, the occasion of the park's opening, 22nd of October 1857, was attended by 65 to 70,000 people. The population at that time was only 85,000 people. Shops and mills closed for the afternoon to allow the locals to celebrate their new public park. 3 days before the park was officially opened, William Billington, a national, if not internationally celebrated poet, wrote a sonnet to commemorate not only the occasion, but the park itself. And I'll just read you one verse from that sonnet. Where land and water formed as fair a scene as ever slept beneath the soft serene, autumnal heavens o'erblushed beneath the smile of rosy spring, who robes the earth in green. It was written in 1857 about Corporation Park. And I'd just like to quickly voice my support for the Corporation Park supporters group who continue to fight to save this important building. The park's conservatory was opened in 1902 and was constructed to house exotic plants from across the British Empire. Last summer, though, as I photographed the wrought iron and through the vandalised glass windows damp with the typical wet summer of East Lancashire, I was reminded of my time spent in the conservatory as a young boy. I remembered the heat inside, the looming magnificent trees and ferns. It was my closest physical experience to the jungle, the other experiences emitted only from film and television. In short, I felt sadness at what the conservatory had become and felt responsible to present it as I experienced it. Intrigue, melancholy, and nostalgia. Whether these images contribute to the current debate about how to effectively describe visually Blackburn's social and cultural themes is perhaps a topic for another day. But what the Talbot archive provides us with is the view that photography can be employed to provide a balanced view over time, but that it can also be limited to stereotypes, generalization, and an oversimplification of themes such as community cohesion. And what effect would a more nostalgic view of the town provide the viewer with anyway? Interestingly, the notion of nostalgia becomes extremely important in this context. Traditionally, nostalgia, termed by Swiss doctors in the 17th century to describe what they thought to be a medical condition, is associated with a wistful yearning to return to a bygone age, often filtered through rose-tinted memories of the past. My previous research has included an attempt to return to the past, to recall memories and extract them, to analyse them through the use of photography and autobiographical writing. As Bradbury describes it, my nostalgic approach was arguably a yearning to return, but also an attempt to dwell upon Blackburn's longer-term past. In a holistic sense, it seems this was a strategy, albeit not always consciously, of attempting to describe the indescribable, which in turn mirrors closely the practice of photography. And this is a quote from Tackham and Vale from 2016. The photograph mediates time, immobilizing a moment and reducing it to a two-dimensional representation of an event, location, circumstance, or person. In effect, the photograph can never represent the present, the moment encapsulated as past, never to be experienced again. Through the process of making new photographs of Blackburn, I reflected back to a recent holiday in Italy, how I made photographs as the tourist, seeking out the viewpoint, the panorama. I concluded that as the tourist we often seek to reinforce the stereotype rather than break it. Why pay for a holiday that betrays the image one was seeking in the first place? And therefore I did the same, seeking out elevation, seeking the view of Blackburn, and in doing so found a new town, a town that I had previously not been too familiar with. In consideration and contradiction of those earlier visual examples drawn from the media, Blackburn is at times a beautiful, intriguing and visually striking place. Lush green football fields, new architecture, urban development, twisting historical streets. And yes, this may not be Durham or Bath. Our historic buildings, what is left of them, must compete with the need for commercial spaces and more recently have been surrounded by sites of redevelopment. But they are the aspects of the town that will ensure that its inhabitants continue to have perspective. A very important term here on their history, whilst experiencing an improved landscape in which to live. These latest photographs are taken under shifting conditions and describe contrasting landscapes. The photographs are taken under warm skies and selenium-tinted street lighting. The views take us through complex structures and over quiet paved courtyards. And all the while, as the photographs were being made, I wandered with the optimism of a tourist in an unfamiliar town, confident that no matter the outcome, bleak or romantic, that I was discovering and exploring a new Blackburn, one that contradicts the culturally apocalyptic vision provided by representatives of our national media. Thank you.